Hello everyone, and welcome to Anomaly Archive where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you're listening to my videos from since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's reach 10 subscribers until the end of this month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I hurried home from work. It was already dark and frosty. It was December after all. Since I worked in one city and lived in another, I had to take the train. In the morning, to work, in the evening, home. The journey took just under an hour. Having ascended to the deserted platform, I began to wait for the train. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was located on the outskirts, near an industrial zone, and usually there were only a few people here. But today it was completely empty. Taking out my phone, I started searching for something on the internet. The train approached so quietly that I was pleasantly surprised it arrived a full 5 minutes early. That doesn't happen often. This fact only added to the positivity, and I literally jumped into its open doors. I wanted to warm up in the heated carriage. Outside, it was about 25 degrees below zero. Entering the warm carriage, I could literally feel my mood lift by a dozen points. Moreover, the carriage was completely empty. You could sit wherever you wanted. Beauty! I would be home soon, and ahead of me were 2 days off, for which I had a ton of plans for. As soon as I settled in comfortably, the train started moving and picking up speed. I was about to check the internet, but lo and behold, my phone suddenly lost all connection to the outside world. I honestly didn't expect such a nuisance from my trusty Samsung. 2 SIM cards, and both were out of service. I restarted the phone, the same picture. Well, whatever. This minor inconvenience couldn't ruin my mood. I took out my headphones, turned on an audiobook, and leaned back in anticipation of the conductor. In my headphones, a monotonous voice droned on, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, a thought flashed through my mind. Had I passed my stop? My heart raced, and I immediately looked at the time. I've been traveling for about an hour now. My station should be coming up, but the train kept speeding along without slowing down. Outside the windows, night, the moon, and the forest. An endless forest on both the right and the left. In the carriage, there is still no soul. It felt somehow unsettling. I looked at the electronic board with the scrolling text, but it was empty. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Let me, walk forward through the carriages and ask people what the last stop was. I put my phone with headphones in my pocket and walked into the next car. Empty. I keep going. I walked through probably 5 dimly lit carriages. No one in sight. My gaze fell on the emergency communication button. I approached it and pressed. A wild screech and hiss blasted through the speakers, and I jumped back in surprise. Thoughts were racing through my mind, and I didn't know what to do. I looked at the emergency brake. It was pulled. My right hand rose to scratch my head, and then I remembered that I had a hat. I left it on the seat in the car I got into at the station. I hurriedly headed back for the hat. On the way, I noticed that the emergency brakes were torn off everywhere. This only increased the anxiety. But if I had known what awaited me on the way to my carriage, I wouldn't have gone back at all. But I didn't know. In general, I make my way through 3 cars towards the tail, enter the next one, and from the opposite end, it entered the car. When I saw it, I froze right in the doorway. I was drenched in sweat, and my legs almost gave way, and a kind of rasp escaped my throat. It was of enormous height and width, and was slowly coming towards me on huge bare feet. In shape, the legs were like human ones, only the size of each foot was like a child's sled. In the carriage, a single dusty lamp burned, illuminating a mystical scene that seemed to me like a dream. The enormous hands of the creature, with palms like excavator buckets, reached the floor. His fingers were as thick as my hand, and he had to stoop to fit through the height of the carriage. The enormous belly hung over the pants. This mutant was dressed in a conductor's uniform, which was also of enormous size, but was bursting at the seams from the body straining against it. The uniform was dirty and torn. A large, tattered conductor's leather bag hung from a strap over his shoulder. But the most terrifying thing was what was sitting on the shoulders. It was a huge bald head, covered in scars with no eyeballs, and eyelids sewn shut with a mattress stitch. The mouth was so large that an average watermelon could fit entirely inside it. The monster slowly moved forward, feeling each seat with its massive hands. He meticulously checked every inch of the train car. He felt under the seats themselves, and even groped the luggage racks. At the same time, he mumbled something incoherent, snorted, grunted, and wheezed. Sometimes it was possible to make out the growled words, "Show your ticket." At that moment, the train jolted, and my stupor passed. I quickly turned around and dashed back. I ran past 10 cars, or maybe all 15, when a figure of a seated person flashed by to my right. My brain didn't immediately react to this information, and my legs, paralyzed by fear, didn't obey the command to stop. So I rushed to the vestibule and there, with an effort of will, managed to stop my legs. I turned around and looked at the person. A man was dozing by the window, approximately in the middle of the carriage. I rushed over to him to wake him up, and when I grabbed him by the shoulder, he woke up. "Let's run away from here, or we're done for. There's a mutant over there," I shouted anxiously. "Ah, so you ran into the conductor," the passenger said with a bitter smirk. I was somewhat taken aback by his calmness. I opened my mouth to say something, but all the words in my head got completely tangled. "Don't worry, just sit down. I'll explain everything to you right now," the stranger offered. His calm tone affected me. My wobbly legs buckled, and I sat down opposite the stranger. And he continued, "Between us and the conductor, there are 10 to 12 cars. As you probably noticed, the conductor is blind and moves very slowly. It takes him about 20 minutes to feel his way through the entire carriage, the vestibule, and squeeze into the next one. So, he will reach our carriage in about 3 hours. So, I have time to somehow explain to you what's going on here." "What's going on here?" I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "My name is Zachary Bennett. You can just call me Uncle Zach. I am a passenger on the Phantom train, and now you are too." I caught my breath and examined my fellow passenger. He was about twice my age, around 60 years old, with an intelligent appearance, a small graying beard, a slightly crumpled dark hat on his head, and he was wearing a dark coat that also looked a bit wrinkled. "Why did you call the train Phantom? And when will my station come?" I continued to ask, selecting the most pressing questions from the ones swirling in my head. "Your station won't exist. This train is in a different dimension compared to our world." Sympathetically, Uncle Zach said and continued, "It will be difficult for you to understand all this right now, but I will try to explain. The situation is as follows. We have found ourselves in a parallel dimension. This electric train sometimes stops at stations and picks up passengers. Moreover, it takes passengers from that dimension into this, the parallel one. It's always just one passenger, and it's impossible to return from it to our world." "How is that possible?" I asked skeptically. "Look out the window. What do you see?" he said. "It's dark there," I replied. "Exactly," my companion confirmed. "In this world, it's always night, and the electric train rushes through the endless winter taiga. On both sides, trees, an endless coniferous ocean, and frost. I've been traveling for over a month now, although the concept of time here is very relative, and outside the window, nothing changes. Only occasionally are there stations, abandoned, desolate, amidst the endless taiga. And after the train makes a stop there, a new passenger appears on it. At the last station, you got on it. And why didn't you get off the train at that moment?" I asked. "Those who get off it remain at an abandoned station in the frosty taiga of this strange world, and dies either from the cold or—" Here my interlocutor fell silent. "Or what?" I whispered. "Have you seen the conductor?" he asked. Just imagine what kind of monsters inhabit this taiga. This electric train, like a back valve, lets people from our world into its world, but I don't know how to get back. All of this felt like some kind of nonsense or a cruel prank. This evening, I got on the train to go home and ended up who knows where. The connection doesn't work. I can't get out, but there must be some way out. Listen, what if we walked forward in the direction of the train's movement? We could reach the electric locomotive, and there are the engineers, I began to reason. That's futile, interrupted my companion. Firstly, I'm afraid to even imagine what the train drivers look like here. And secondly, the electric train is infinite, or rather, without beginning. How can this be? I wondered. Don't forget, my friend, we are in another world here. The laws of our world do not apply. I have been moving forward through the train cars for over a month. The conductor is rushing. In general, it doesn't have a beginning, and it ends right behind the conductor. When he passes the next carriage, it immediately disappears, as if it dissolves into thin air. And who is this conductor? I asked. One of the natives of this world. He explained. This world is inhabited by mutants, each of whom is tailored for a specific task. Besides the conductor, there are road workers, cashiers at the station ticket offices, and even law enforcement officers. They are all extremely aggressive, and we are just food to them. I saw the conductor eat Ryan. He grabbed him with his big hand like a pie, first bit off his head, and then devoured all of Ryan without a trace. To this day, whenever I remember, my legs go weak. Who is Ryan? I gasped. Ryan became a passenger a few days after me. Uncle Zach began to tell. I measure the day with my wristwatch, since there's no sunlight here. And then Ryan came up with a theory that you could leave the train if you got behind the conductor. And Ryan decided to hide under the seat, hoping that the conductor was blind and wouldn't find him. But the conductor found him. I tried to talk Ryan out of it, Uncle Zach lamented, but he wouldn't listen to me, and I stood in the vestibule and watched. And when the conductor grabbed him, then that crunch of the skull, in general, a horrific sight. After what I saw, I probably ran about 20 train cars. I just couldn't calm down. I still have goosebumps. Uncle Zach fell silent, and I didn't know what to say either. I was trying to piece together some coherent picture of what was happening to me. But it wasn't easy. My mind couldn't comprehend the endless electric train, couldn't understand how I had entered another world and what to do with all of this. Are you hungry? Uncle Zach asked in a fatherly manner. His question pulled me out of the chaos of my thoughts, and I realized that I was ravenously hungry. Yes, a little, I mumbled. Uncle Zach pulled a sports bag from under the bench and began to take out bundles from it. Here's the chicken in foil, bread, tomatoes, cucumber, 1.5 liters of soda, he listed. And where did you get the food? I wondered. Well, you've been here for a long time. That's another oddity of this commuter train. He began to explain as he turned the chicken. The thing is, as we move through the carriages, we find various bags with food and water in some of them. They look as if a passenger got off at their station and forgot their luggage. But we really don't know where these bags come from. It feels like someone doesn't want us to starve to death here. And are there any other passengers here besides us? I asked, chewing on the chicken. Yeah, Austin and Jack, but they went far ahead. Austin once found a note that said there was a portal in the electric train through which one could return to our world. An unknown passenger explained in it that this portal constantly moves forward through the train cars, somehow synchronized with the conductor, and is always 1,000 cars ahead of him, so they want to look for it. They think they will find a way out, Uncle Zach said while chopping tomatoes and bread. But I think there is no portal, so I'm not in a hurry. In the sky outside the windows hung a huge moon, illuminating the endless taiga with a pale, ashy light. The wheels, like the hooves of some mythical horse, rhythmically clattered on the railway. 2 people in the half-light were eating chicken in an empty carriage of a strange train without a beginning, speeding who knows where across the expanses of an incomprehensible world. It's hard to imagine a more mystical scene, I thought, crunching on a cucumber. "It's time for us to head out," Uncle Zach said, glancing at the clock. "The conductor will be here soon. By the way, you never introduced yourself, young man. What's your name?" he continued. "Lucas. And we can use the informal you," I replied. "Very nice to meet you," he grunted, getting up. "Come on, Lucas. Let's get out of here before the conductor arrives." Uncle Zach took his bag, and we walked through the empty carriages, away from the conductor. "Count the cars we've passed, and I'll count too. Then we'll compare," he said to me. And I started counting on my fingers as we passed each car. We passed 7 cars, and in front of the door of the 8th, Uncle Zach suddenly stopped and raised his hand. I understood his gesture and froze as well. A second later, he pointed his finger into the dimly lit space of the carriage in front of us. I squinted and saw a person lying on the floor. He was lying between the rows of seats, with his feet towards us, and something white was clenched in his right palm. The man was not moving, and only the train rocked him from side to side. From time to time, Uncle Zach began to whisper, "The commuter train presents the passengers with a car full of surprises. Surprises come in all kinds, but, as a rule, they are always deadly dangerous. It's as if a malevolent experimenter is conducting dangerous experiments on us. In these moments, one must be extremely cautious." "What are we going to do?" I whispered. "Stay here, and I'll go take a look," Uncle Zach quietly commanded. He dropped the bag on the floor, slowly pushed the train doors apart just enough to squeeze through sideways, and, crouching, moved towards the figure on the floor. I, ready to come to his aid at any moment, stayed back and watched. Sneaking up to the one lying on the floor, he leaned down, then touched him with his hand, and, after a second, suddenly recoiled and sat down next to him on the seat. Then he gestured for me to come over. I cautiously approached. "This is Austin," Uncle Zach said mournfully. "He is dead," he said, leaning down and pulling a piece of paper from Austin's palm. It was a note from Dylan. "I still don't understand what happened," wrote Dylan in his note. "Austin said he wanted to pardon, relieve himself, and stayed in the vestibule while I went to the next carriage. I waited for him for about 10 minutes, then went to look for him. But he wasn't there. He walked back 3 more cars. Empty. I thought he decided to come back to you, so I didn't look for him anymore. I moved forward in search of the portal, and after 14 cars, I saw him on the floor dead, without signs of violence. But how did he end up ahead of me? Almost 10 cars ahead. Uncle Zach, be careful. Damn, what are we going to do with the body now? There's nowhere to bury him. And leaving it like this seems kind of inconvenient. Maybe we should burn it? Cremation is just like a funeral," I suggested, "and let the whole train car burn to a crisp. What do we have to lose? Under no circumstances. Don't even think about setting anything on fire." Uncle Zach exclaimed anxiously. "We already tried to burn the carriage, thinking we would set it on fire right in front of the conductor. And if the conductor burned in it, we would end up in our own dimension. But that wasn't the case. As soon as they started making a fire from the seats, a firefighter appeared right away. Somewhere in the vestibule, he materialized from the conductor's side. The monster, I tell you, is no worse than the conductor, only it's sighted and wearing a helmet. And he also has a gaff and a fire extinguisher. We almost dropped our jaws when we saw him, but he put out the fire with a fire extinguisher, with a hook in hand, and then ran after us, roaring like a wounded bull. He kicks the doors between the train cars down. I don't know how many cars we ran from him, and when I collapsed, exhausted, I thought, this is the end for me. But he disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared. In general, I wouldn't recommend playing with fire here. Yeah, I see you can't really mess around here. I was impressed by the story. Whose luggage is this? I said, pointing with my finger at the dark backpack on the floor, under one of the seats. I don't know, let's take a look, Uncle Zach suggested. I placed the backpack on the seat, unzipped it, and we began to examine its contents. Inside, there were several boiled eggs, slices of smoked sausage, some bread, a couple of apples, and a thermos with hot tea. In the inner pocket of the backpack, we found some money, about $200, some receipts, keys, and a ticket for this train. And then, upon seeing this ticket, an idea came to me. Uncle Zach, the conductor is asking for a ticket, so let's try showing him this ticket. We would then find ourselves on the other side of the conductor and be able to enter our world. Well, first of all, we only have one ticket, Uncle Zach began to reason. And secondly, it's dangerous. What if the conductor doesn't like something? He'll eat it up and not even ask for a name. First, we should somehow experiment with this ticket, but from a safe distance. And at that moment, we both looked at Austin's body. The conductor will definitely eat him when he finds him on the floor without a ticket, and we won't be able to hide him anywhere anyway. Let's sit Austin down and put this ticket in his hand, and then we'll watch what the conductor does, Uncle Zach suggested. I nodded silently. That's exactly what we did. Austin looked like a sleeping passenger. We sat him by the window, facing the back of the train, right by the entrance to the carriage. In his right hand was placed a ticket found in the little backpack. Uncle Zach and I moved to the front of the carriage and started waiting for the conductor, passing the time with conversation. Uncle Zach, why was all the food in the backpack fresh, and even the tea in the thermos hot? I asked. It's always like this on this train. All the luggage we found, and it looks like it was just forgotten by some absent-minded passenger, he replied. Damn. I feel like some kind of rabbit being experimented on and fed just so it doesn't die of hunger, I lamented. If only we could find out who this evil genius is, who is tormenting us like this. There's no genius. It's just that a person knows very little even about the world they inhabit, Uncle Zach said. And what can we say about the laws that prevail in neighboring worlds? You have to know how to adapt, he continued. You need to try to understand what's going on here, to understand the rules of the game, so to speak, and then we might find a way out. Some time passed, and we heard the sound of doors slamming between the carriages and realized that the conductor had reached our carriage. Being in the same carriage with him was very unpleasant and a bit scary. So, Uncle Zach and I went out to the vestibule and started watching what was happening through the glass of the closed doors. It was calmer that way. We saw the conductor mumbling some nonsense as he squeezed into the carriage and began thoroughly searching the entire space. He ran his big hand over the seat where Austin's body was and felt his hand with the ticket. Carefully took the ticket, then pulled some device out of his bag and inserted the ticket into it. A red light lit up on the machine and a long, unpleasant sound was heard. The conductor started shouting excitedly, grabbed poor Austin's body, and bit off his head in one go. I vomited right onto the glass through which we were watching. Uncle Zach grabbed my hand and started to lead me away from the conductor. The experiment failed. The conductor's machine does not recognize tickets from our world. We were engulfed by despair mixed with disappointment. Moreover, fear was pushing us to get as far away from the conductor as possible. At first, we walked very quickly. We didn't count the cars. But then fatigue took over, and we took a break. The cars were different. Some were old, dirty, and rusty. They smelled unpleasant, and I didn't want to stop in them. The others, however, looked quite new and clean. We sat down in one of those. Let's have some tea, Lucas, wheezed out of breath Uncle Zach, pulling out of his bag the thermos we found in the backpack and a couple of candies. The thermos lid also served as a cup, and a plastic bowl was placed inside it. Thus, the thermos was designed for two people. I drank from the lid cup, and Uncle Zach from the bowl. Uncle Zach, you mentioned some kind of law enforcement. Is that the local police? Yeah, something like that, he said, sipping his tea. I didn't see them myself. Jack told me about it. He got here before I did, so there were 3 passengers. Jack himself, Austin, and Stanley, a semi-homeless guy. Stanley had been living here long before Jack and Austin arrived. They say he liked it here. In our world, he didn't have a place to live, but here, there was free food and a roof over his head. He even managed to brew some homemade alcohol from various fruits and candies he found in bags. One day, they found a note, and it said that you can call a crew to the carriage by pressing the call button and, ignoring the noises, shouting the phrase, "We have an emergency in the carriage." And then it was said that, supposedly, it's better not to do this, because two attendants will appear and take with them the first person they come across, and you will never see them again. And that resisting is useless. They have incredible strength, and they look so intimidating that your knees buckle. When Jack read the note aloud, Stanley started laughing and showing off. He said that all this about the duty officers was nonsense. He had pressed those buttons 100 times and never seen anyone. Stanley was heavily intoxicated from his homemade brew, and he started loudly cursing, saying that he wouldn't care if he saw all the cops in the grave, that he could wipe them all out with one hand, and all that sort of thing. Then, according to Jack's story, Stanley ran up to the button, pressed it, and shouted, "We have an emergency in the carriage." From the speakers came a screeching and hissing, but Stanley didn't care. He was shouting at the top of his lungs, "We have an emergency in the carriage." Jack said that he and Austin wanted to pull him away from the button, but then something happened that left them rooted to the spot. Two people burst in from the hallway. One was huge, reaching the ceiling. The other was up to his waist. Their faces were covered in terrible scars. Both have remnants of uniforms. The blue shirts were tattered with brown stains. The big guy's hands were so huge that they actually burst the sleeves. Both barefoot, but with epaulets. They roared like bears, their eyes red and wild. They grabbed Stanley and started beating him, knocking out all his teeth and smashing his face to a bloody pulp. Then they tied him up, put handcuffs on him, and dragged him by his legs back to where they came from. Jack said that he and Austin were paralyzed by what they saw. For a long time, they were afraid to move further down the train cars. But the conductor was pushing from behind, and they had to keep moving. They haven't seen Stanley since then, and the blood trail from him ended in the passage between the cars, as if all three of them had simply vanished there. "Serious business," I mumbled, not knowing what else to say. At that moment, we noticed that the train was starting to slow down. "It looks like there will be a station," Uncle Zach said thoughtfully, looking out the window. "And possibly another passenger." "What? Aren't there passengers at every station?" I wondered. "No," he replied. "Sometimes the electric train stands at the station for quite a while, as if waiting for its prey, but it doesn't always succeed in snatching another poor soul from our world. What if we get off at the station and talk the passenger out of getting on?" I blurted out, "You're naive, Lucas. You won't see the passenger, don't forget. We are in different realities. He's at the station in our native world, and we are with you. Who knows where?" Meanwhile, the electric train stealthily crept up to the station and came to a complete stop. The doors hissed and clanked open. Something indistinct grunted from the speakers. The station was a two-story building with shattered, dark windows. The empty, nighttime platform was illuminated by a pair of dim lanterns. In the wall of the building, there was a single unbroken and barred window in which a dim light flickered, and above it, the letters KS were visible. Further on, the letters either fell off or were never there to begin with. But it was clear that this was a ticket office. The atmosphere of desolation and twilight was downright mystical. "Can I go out on a reconnaissance mission?" I asked. "Sure. Only when you hear the voice from the speakers, immediately get on the train. Otherwise, you'll stay here forever." "But what's in the building?" I wouldn't let it go. "Better not go in there," Uncle Zach warned. "There are such creatures living there that you won't be pleased. By the way, if you see anyone on the street, run with all your might to the train car. They usually don't come here. It seems like it's not their place. But if they catch them on the street, they'll eat them. Stop making it worse, Uncle Zach. Now I'm scared to go outside." "Of course," Uncle Zach said meaningfully. I myself never go out either. A perpetual frosty night hung over this strange world. But I still decided to get out of the carriage because I had come up with a plan. I decided to go to the ticket office and try to buy a ticket. Stepping out of the carriage, I felt a sharp frost. Strange, but there was no snow anywhere. I just now noticed this. Looking around, I saw on both sides, disappearing into the darkness of the forest, the train cars. Is it really endless? I thought, slowly making my way to the ticket counter. The cashier's window was murky, but through the dusty glass, the silhouette of the cashier could be seen. It was impossible to see the cashier in detail, and honestly, I didn't really want to. In the lower part of the window, I saw a rusty tray extended out onto the street. Throwing a $50 note into it, I pushed it into the ticket booth and said, 2 tickets, while showing 2 fingers through the window, in case they couldn't hear me well at the booth. The silhouette in the window stirred, and suddenly the tray with the $50 note was knocked back, and an indistinct roar and some cursing came from outside the window. I jumped back in surprise. My heart was pounding. I looked at the doorway in the building. I felt uneasy at the thought that one of its inhabitants might hear the noise and come out onto the platform. But it all turned out fine. Carefully taking my $50 note from the tray, I turned my head towards the carriage, and I saw some movement. Creeping closer, I discerned the outline of a figure under the train, or rather, just its rear part. Crouching and sticking my head under the train car, I saw a huge guy in a dirty orange vest working on something. Next to him on the platform lay a hammer and some other tool. Under the wagon, his discontented grumbling and the sound of metal clinking could be heard. He was probably fixing some kind of malfunction in the lower part of the wagon. Probably the local mechanic. And how did he not notice me? I thought in horror. I felt an urgent need to dive into the carriage before the mechanic spotted me. But then I saw that a red badge was sticking out of the back pocket of his dirty pants. Probably it's a railroad worker's ID. Flashed through my mind, and a plan immediately formed. I crept up behind the mechanic, sharply snatched the ID from his pocket, and dashed towards the train car doors. His reaction was simply primal, and he immediately roared and lunged after me. Losing precious seconds climbing the iron steps of the carriage, I already felt in the vestibule that the mutant was catching up with me. Pushing the doors open to the carriage on the left, where Uncle Zach was waiting for me, I dashed towards the back of the electric train. The doors had barely closed behind me when I felt the mechanic grab my leg. Falling to the floor, I managed to grab the leg of the first seat. Standing on the platform, the mechanic reached out to me with his incredibly long arms. And this was despite the fact that I was already in the carriage. Uncle Zach, with a frightened face, rushed to help me. He grabbed my clothes and started pulling me into the carriage with all his might. The situation became a stalemate. From the rear of the train, the conductor was inexorably approaching us, while ahead of me, the mechanic's hydraulic arm was pulling me forward. The forces were unequal, and Uncle Zach and I understood that the mechanic was about to pull me out of the carriage like a cork from a bottle. We were resisting with all our might. Uncle Zach was shouting at me to hold on, but my hand was slowly straightening the numb fingers. We looked at each other in horror and mentally said our goodbyes. Suddenly, I remembered the emergency call button for the unit. With some incredible effort, I reached it and, pressing the button, shouted at the top of my lungs, "Emergency in our Sierra! Emergency in our car!" And that's when the real horror began. A squad of 2 mutants burst into the vestibule, and the first person they grabbed was the mechanic, who had half infiltrated the electric train and was dragging me by the leg out of the carriage. A second later, I heard the crunch of breaking bones and the wild scream of the mechanic. A bloody massacre began in the vestibule. The carriage was bouncing as if a herd of elephants were dancing on its roof. These 2 goblins dragged the mechanic into the vestibule and were literally tearing him apart. The growling and screams were so loud that they made my ears ring. Uncle Zach, out of breath pulled me to the middle of the carriage. Turning around, I saw that the severed hand of the mechanic was still holding onto my leg and dragging behind me, leaving a bloody trail. And the rest of it was flying around the vestibule, being struck by the attendants, shattering the windows and the train doors. We, frozen in shock, watched what was happening. Suddenly, the mechanic fell silent, and through the shattered windows, we saw how those two busily dragged his remains into the corridor between the cars. Exhausted, we sat on the floor of the carriage. From the speakers, an indistinct but expressive announcement sounded again. The train hissed as it closed its doors and continued its endless journey through the vastness of a strange world. "Lucas, what the hell did you catch this mutant for?" Panting, Uncle Zach growled angrily. I took the freshly stolen ID from my pocket and handed it to Uncle Zach. "Well, what do you need it for?" he continued, clutching his heart. "I'll show it at the ticket office and get a couple of local tickets so we can get the hell out of this damn train," I panted. "The theory is certainly interesting, colleague," he quipped, "but because of that, they almost took your head off." "Come on, Uncle Zach. Everything turned out fine. But now, at the next station, I'll get us tickets. I'm already afraid to imagine what this will look like," he continued to taunt as he handed me back the badge. I, smirking, opened the ID to examine this trophy. It was as caricatured as everything in this incomprehensible world. The straight lines consisted of a mixture of Cyrillic and Latin letters. Uppercase and lowercase letters were arranged in random order. It was impossible to read anything, but everything was serious, even the photograph of the owner with a large round seal. The wrinkled face in the photo was disgusting. The eyes, one of which was higher than the other, expressed a complete lack of intelligence. The lipless mouth grinned with large, yellow horse teeth. Two slits instead of a nose and huge ears completed the picture. "Uncle Zach, do you think the cashier will notice that the photo isn't me? Come on, you are just like twins. Just one face," he said hoarsely, laughing. After that joke, we absolutely couldn't get off the floor. Adrenaline was leaving our bodies, and we were overtaken by nervous laughter. We laughed until we cried, rolling on the floor. When we finished laughing, I tried to free my leg from the mechanic's hand that had latched onto it, but it turned out to be not easy. The grip of his fingers was literally dead. His hand was torn straight from the shoulder, about 2 meters long and very heavy. It hung on my leg like a weight. Apparently, a spasm was gripping the huge fingers with an iron grip, and the dead hand refused to let go of my leg. "Cut the tendons," Uncle Zach said, handing me his knife. I took the knife and began to cut the back of the dead palm. The fingers gradually weakened one by one, and I finally managed to free my leg. In the dim light of the carriage, on the floor lay the enormous hand of the mechanic, its wrist swaying like a predatory spider in time with the movement of the electric train, and we wanted to leave this carriage as soon as possible. It seemed that the hand would come to life and grab someone by the throat. "Uncle Zach, let's get out of here," I suggested. "I really don't want to wait for the conductor." He silently took his bag, and we carefully bypassed the arm and went to the vestibule. Throwing open the doors, we saw a nightmarish scene. The vestibule was drenched in the mechanic's blood, dripping from the ceiling, running down the walls, and on the floor lay broken teeth, some bloody scraps, and a huge eye. Underfoot, the shards of broken glass crunched. There were dents on the walls and doors from blows. We were scared to go further. What if those two are waiting for us in the next vestibule? Uncle Zach entered the passage between the train cars. The blood trail ended there. He slightly opened the door to the vestibule of the neighboring car. It was empty. In the carriage, nothing suspicious either. "Lucas, we need to walk through 10 to 12 cars so we can have a quiet snack and nap," Uncle Zach said without stopping. "No problem," I replied, limping. After the mechanic's iron grip, my leg hurt, but I was ready to endure it just to get as far away as possible from that bloody carriage and the approaching conductor. After passing 3 carriages, we found a large plastic bag and a lady's handbag. The bag contained expensive sausage, cognac, a 1.5-liter bottle of cola, fruits, chocolate, and a jar of olives. The pink handbag lay nearby, and on it sparkled a label with 3 Latin letters. NGA inside, a standard women's kit. Nothing interesting, except for the stun gun we brought with us. Uncle Zach transferred the found food into his bag, and we moved on. After another 9 cars, we decided to take a break. They took out the food and set up a small feast with some cognac. Then fatigue took over, and we dozed off. I woke up because Uncle Zach was shaking me by the shoulder. "What happened, Uncle Zach?" I jumped up. "The train stopped," he said. "Another station." I glanced out the window. In the darkness on the empty platform stood a concrete ticket booth, and next to it under a rusty canopy were a couple of broken benches. The entire night scene was illuminated by a barely flickering lantern on a pole. The ticket window flickered weakly, as if a candle were burning there, or the electric lamp had a poor connection. I stepped onto the platform and inhaled the frosty air. Uncle Zach stood in the vestibule and watched me. "Uncle Zach, why isn't there any snow here?" I quietly asked from the platform. "It's winter outside, or so it seems." "I don't know," he replied. "I've been traveling for so long. I haven't seen snow even once." Looking around, I slowly approached the ticket window, placed the ID stolen from the mechanic and a $50 note in the rusty tray. With a creak, I pushed the tray into the depths of the ticket booth, and he loudly said, "2 tickets," while showing 2 fingers through the window. Behind the murky glass, a rather large shadow stirred. Muffled mumbling was heard, and after a few seconds, the tray shot out. Inside it was an ID, my $50 note, and 2 tickets made of thick cardboard. At that moment, an unintelligible announcement came over the loudspeakers, and I realized that the train was about to depart. Grabbing everything that was on the tray, I dashed into the carriage and barely made it into the vestibule when the doors closed. "Well, what?" Uncle Zach said, all impatient. I handed him 1 ticket. "Wow!" exclaimed Uncle Zach, carefully taking the small cardboard ticket with a seal and a series of random letters in his hands. "These are local tickets," he continued. "Yes, this one is yours and this one is mine." I showed my ticket. Moreover, I got them for free. Apparently, 1 identification is enough. Meanwhile, the train was picking up speed, and we walked into the car and sat down on the bench. "Uncle Zach, let's wait for the conductor, and I'll show him the ticket while standing in the aisle. You will also stand a bit behind me in the aisle, so to speak on the starting blocks. If this mutant suddenly doesn't like the ticket, we'll have a chance to run away from it. Well, if everything goes smoothly, then you will show him your ticket right after." "Good plan." Uncle Zach nodded approvingly. "It's just a pity about Jack," I continued. "Will he really stay here forever? We won't be able to catch up with him anyway. He's gone far ahead," Uncle Zach replied. "They chose their own path, he and Austin. Austin died, and I'm not sure if Jack is still alive. And we have been given a chance. It's risky, but we have to take it." "Uncle Zach, what's going on with the conductor? Why are the train cars disappearing behind him?" "Well, I don't really know. Maybe the train car itself becomes some kind of portal through which he can enter our world. We didn't want to leave this carriage. It seemed to bring good luck, and it was in this one that our tickets would turn out to be lucky." After a while, we heard the sound of a door slamming in the vestibule and saw the conductor. He was struggling to squeeze through the train's doors. His incoherent mumbling instilled a quiet horror. I wanted to run away immediately, but composing myself, I took an electric shocker from Uncle Zach just in case and walked to the middle of the carriage. Holding the ticket in my hand, I stood ready to run far away from here in case of failure. Uncle Zach was standing about 5 steps behind me, equally ready to leave the carriage. We understood that the conductor wouldn't chase after us, but his inhuman reaction and his long, shovel-like hands kept us on edge. Groping the space of the carriage, he slowly approached me. In his mumbling, I several times discerned the phrase, "Show your ticket." Finally, he felt for my outstretched hand with the ticket, carefully took it, and reached into his bag for his control device. My heart was pounding at an incredible speed. I gripped the stun gun in my hand and prepared to jump back if that annoying buzzer went off in his machine. Taking out his strange little machine, he inserted my ticket into it. The machine purred contentedly, beeped briefly, and a green light lit up on it. The conductor extracted my ticket from the machine and, muttering the word, "All set," handed me the perforated ticket. I took the ticket and sat down in my seat. The conductor, feeling his way through the carriage, moved on to Uncle Zach. Uncle Zach, seeing that the tickets were suitable, calmed down a bit and also sat down on the little couch. I watched what was happening from behind this mutant, but I was afraid to utter a word so as not to scare away the luck. Uncle Zach, just like me, successfully passed the inspection, and the conductor began to squeeze into the vestibule, feeling it out before moving on to the next car. For some time, Uncle Zach and I sat in our seats, stunned, unable to figure out what to do next. Our carriage wasn't going anywhere. Nothing was changing. The train continued to travel through the night taiga. Then Uncle Zach stood up and silently approached me. He looked at me, and I looked at him. "What's next?" I whispered for some reason. "I don't know," he replied. "Let's check the previous car. Maybe he got lost," I suggested, and we went to check. When we entered the vestibule of the neighboring carriage and confirmed that it wasn't missing, we froze in surprise. There was light in the carriage, and there were people in it. A second wave of paralysis washed over Uncle Zach and me. We stood silently, rooted to the spot in the vestibule, and through the glass in the doors, we watched the passengers. There were not many of them. A young couple with a girl running around the carriage, a serious man with a briefcase, and two grandmothers chatting animatedly. I don't know how long we stood like that, but the first to start coming to his senses was Uncle Zach. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "Did we come back? But why didn't our carriage disappear?" It was clear that a bunch of questions were buzzing around in his head. His face expressed some disbelief at what was happening, as if he suspected that this was some kind of another experiment, and the passengers in the carriage were not real. Then he slowly turned around and walked into our carriage, opened the doors to the vestibule, and we saw that there was also light on and passengers were riding there. Just a minute ago, it was an empty and dark car of a ghost train, and now there are passengers there. They are riding as if nothing had happened. "Lucas, our carriage is gone." Instead of it, another one. "Yeah, right," I replied. "So that's how it works. You have to switch to another car to get into our world." Uncle Zach stepped into the carriage, and I followed him. We slowly walked down the aisle, looking at the passengers, then into another car, then into a third. Staring at people, we looked ridiculous, and probably everyone thought we were some crazy homeless people. We gradually realized that we had managed to break free from the eerie world of the phantom train. The people around us were real. Everyone was going about their business. Uncle Zach turned to me. Tears were visible in his eyes. Apparently, in that dark world, he had lost faith that he would ever be able to return. "We did it," he said, and embraced me like a father. I also embraced him. We were overwhelmed by a wave of joy. Our legs turned to jelly, and we sat down on the seat. Our faces shone with happiness, and the train began to slow down, and a woman's voice announced that the stop was called 666 kilometer, and that the next station was Deerfield. At that time, we still didn't know where we were, as each of us had boarded the ghost train from different cities. But apparently, you could only get off here at the 666 kilometer platform. It was here that the return portal was located. Outside the window, it was still dark, but this was clearly a different train, and we now knew where we were going. This was our world.